But yeah, what we're going to do is just going to look at this psychosocial risk. We've done an awful lot in the ergonomic, which again is a huge element of it. There are benefits which I'll quickly go through. There's some experience that's now coming forward from people who are smart working from home. The issues, some of the cases that are coming through, which are really quite scary. Some of them actually interesting, but in a way a bit scary. And some of the practical steps that we think that organisations need to be taken from the point of view of managing, you know, and this goes back to who's a home worker, how do we deal with it, and as you say, there's got to be a line drawn to at least show that you've thought about these things. And that's difficult, because how do you get people off smartphones and iPads and those sort of things. Psychosocial risks, this is a growing area, and I guess traditionally, we've been used to confine, you know, things like working at height, confined spaces, all these very obvious risks. And psychosocial risks now have come in, and they're dynamic, they move, they change all the time. They're much, much harder from that point of view to assess, maybe to control. But they are growing, and we're looking at things like presenteeism, which I'll come on to in a bit, which are people who are at work, but actually they probably shouldn't be at work because they are ill, and actually the productivity is reduced. Come on to that in a minute. Mental health, the figures from the HSE over the past 5-6 years show that the number of people off work from depression, anxiety, stress is the biggest now. It accounts for 46% of reported illnesses from people off work, and it is growing. The stress issue seen in local authorities, the stress claims has quadrupled in the past 18 months, largely because of what's going on in the economy as well. People are worried about their jobs. Musculoskeletal, and these are issues which, as employers, we can't ignore. We need to address if we're going to go down that line, because ignoring them, it becomes easy then to put compensation claims against the organisation. Because have you recognised this risk? Show me what your risk assessment is. Show me what your rules are. We don't have any. Thank you very much. You haven't thought about it. We'll see you in court. Psychosocial risks is the recent survey done by Occupational Safety and Health in Europe. And they've recognised the top 5, they're called new psychosocial risks that they're now recognising throughout Europe, which are causing people stress, anxiety, and then people off work, productivity decreasing. And they've recognised these are the top 5 new forms of employment contract where people no longer have a job for life, or maybe it's you know, a year's contract, 6 months contract. Over the past 20 years, more women coming into the workforce, a lot now coming in at part-time employment, and these new contracts employment are causing the stress and these issues. Aging workforce, I reckon by 2024, 50% of the workforce in the UK will be over 50, which is kind of scary actually when you think about it. But again, what effect does that have on musculoskeletal and those type of issues, and how do we deal with that? Work intensification, particularly now you're seeing with where the economy is going, and companies are reducing their workforce, but there's still the same amount of work that needs to be done. And I can't remember the figures, but there's some studies being done now throughout Europe, the US, Canada, where the intensification of work, that people are actually working at top rate all the time, is quite frightening. And there is a bigger expectation now on employees to hit deadlines, to be multi-skilled, and all these issues now which are coming in and hitting us. The high emotional demands at work, which relate also to this poor work-life balance, and this is where the home working, the benefits does come into it. But there's a lot more single-parent families, there's a lot more families where both parties are at work, and it's getting that balance right now. And what has this got to do with employers? Well, one, from a point of view of productivity, it does affect, and all the studies show that these sort of things do affect productivity, but also from managing stress and all these risks, like it or not, there is a requirement on employers to assess and manage these issues and be seen to managing these issues. Presenteeism. And this is where people who probably shouldn't be at work because quite often through state of mind, anxiety, they need to be seen. They feel they have to be seen at work. You know, I was talking to somebody recently who stays an extra hour. Don't do much, but just to be seen at work. And obviously it depends on, it's got greater impact on issues such as mental health, depression, anxiety. Those are the type of people who will suffer from that, who will still come to work, as opposed to respiratory diseases and those which are more obvious. But it also has a greater impact, we see more on white collar workers. So it's not a blue collar issue. It's a white collar worker, and as our whole society becomes more white collar based, if you like, we're going to see more and more of this presenteeism. To the extent, and you can see some of the figures that are coming out with presenteeism as opposed to absenteeism. Australian study, 2-to-1, Germany. So all the studies are showing it has a bigger cost to organisations than absenteeism, which begs the question, is just monitoring absenteeism the best way to predict overall health of your workforce? And it's a very, very difficult thing now to deal with. And how do we actually deal with that? Because if people are suffering from those issues and go off, and again looking at the claims element and that side of things, what have organisations done to assess the risk of these issues? And if one or two organisations now, the bigger organisations, are taking presenteeism into account and have processes in place for that, then surely others should have that in place. What are your policies? Lots of organisations will have stress policies. That's all it is. It's just a policy that sits there. Do your management know what they should be doing, how they should be dealing with it? Because again, all studies show that one of the most important aspects of managing stress is line management, training and input, so they can understand how to deal with staff who are having difficulties and problems. And this study was done by Lancaster University. And their study highlighted a number of issues from people who work at home. And again, you could spread this out to smart working. And the difficulties of people working from home or working away from a main office suffered was this feeling of isolation. They miss out on this emotional support from colleagues, having people around them, the eye contact. This experienced a lot of guilt. Yes, productivity goes up, without doubt. But again, people to a certain extent feel guilty about being away from the office, not being there to help out. If you have office activity and staff within the office, any extra work quite often will go to the people in the office. That has another impact in that people away from the office, are they forgotten about? Does it impact on career progression? Because they're not in there face to face with senior management. They're not in there doing these extra pieces of work which are being asked to. So when management come on with regard to promotion or appraisals, it's those people they have face-to-face contact with that sometimes will gain more of the positive impact. Lack of support, lack of career progression, as we talked about, and this blurring undefined boundaries between work and home, again, is huge. It can be. And a lot of the problems coming from home workers, will say, is related to that blurring. Where does home life start and stop? You read about people who will get up in the morning, have the shower, go out for a walk, to come back into their office at home, because they're saying that we've got to make that break between what is home and what's the office. And that is really, really important. It's also interesting, which we'll come on to in the assessment, do they have an office? Is it their home? Where are the boundaries between what is work and what is home life? Who is coming into that office area? Some other studies, and this I think it was Mumsnet or something like that, would say, particularly for mothers, I know it's counting more and more for fathers, but particularly for mothers, there is this expectation they are at home still. So, hey, you can do all the chores. And so there is that pressure built up because you are never away. You can never break. You know? You've either got work or the home life, home chores. And so you will break away to do those, come back, and your hours of work then creep into the evening, earlier morning. And that has an impact. And if employers are not recognising that and don't do anything about it, potentially there is that level of stress that employees will turn around and say, my employer knew that I was under this, I don't get any support, and the pressure goes back. And the important thing is that people switch off. But again, as employers, you've got to draw that line and tell people you have got to switch off. Because if it becomes habitual, and the organisation are kind of aware that it does, if they are answering reports from the office at 12 o'clock midnight and then getting loads of emails back and feel they have to do that, then there is an issue. But you've got to draw the line, because if you don't draw the line, if you do not have a positive policy in place as an organisation, you are opening yourself up to possible litigation. How do your managers manage smart workers, home workers? What do they do? You know, in the past there were people in the office, they could manage them, they knew what they were doing. So, but how do they do that? If they've got something important to say to people, do they say it on the phone? Do they get them in? What is your organisation's policy regarding line management? That is really, really important. And the training, stress, and all these issues, line management is often forgotten about. And we rightly so, we do a lot of training for employees or staff, but you've got to train line management. They have got to know what the policies and processes are. They've got to have the confidence to be able to deal with these issues in a way which the company wants them to. You have got to create this company scheme. Without any shadow of a doubt, you've got to decide what the scheme is and establish this policy. I say some employees will not be suitable, and that becomes very, very difficult if everybody else is working from home. But some will need greater support. You've got to make sure that their home working area is set up properly. You've got to make sure that that's done. And encourage that identity of the work in their own place and what management support is needed. Some companies say that they reckon that they will put in place that working from home is a privilege which can be withdrawn. Some companies wouldn't think that is good, some do. Regular meetings with remote workers has got to be put in place, and possibly getting teams together on a regular basis. For remote workers, you're saying that, you know, how do they deal with this? And if they have got these targets, delivering on those targets, I think, can help them come to terms with being away from the office and making sure they switch off the computer. In the US litigation lawyers are saying, look, it actually works with paying a company to go out and set up the workstation the way it should be set up, photographing it and having all of that in place, because the cost of that in the long run actually will pay for itself with regards to possible litigation. And there is more to life than increasing the speed, and that's what seems to be going on. It's incredible when you sit in the tube or in the train and everybody's on there, and it's all about, you can't, and it's amazing looking at kids now, and you know, they can do all these 3, 4, 5 different, all these computers going on at one time, and you seem to know what they're doing. Thank you very much. And hopefully it's been useful, and thank you very much for your time. And yeah, any questions? I'm sure everybody's around for a little bit of time, so thank you very much again.